Greetings and welcome back. It's Brandon Jones, psychotherapist, professor, and author. And today we're going to get into day 3 of the 5-day video course. And in today's 3, we're going to look at trauma and brain development. Trauma and brain development. So I'm going to nerd out on you guys a little bit, give you some brain science, some things for you to think about as we move forward and we think about how have Black people been impacted? How has our existence and the environments and the situations we've been in have connected and affected our brains, our bodies, and how we think, what we think, and when we think moving forward. So we're going to get into that today in day 3. I hope you enjoy. Feel free to hit me up at my email if you have any questions, or go to jegna.org if you have any questions. Resources will be available upon request for any of this brain science that I share. So I hope you enjoy this next course. See you on the other side. All right, beautiful. Here we are, day 3. I'm going to dive right into the slides. Make sure you get your pens and your pads if you want to take any notes. This is your opportunity to get that stuff together. Be sure to pause it if you need a little bit more time, because I'm going to share a little bit of brain science and some things for you to ponder on as we move forward. Child development. Probably one of the more important topics that we don't pay enough attention to is childhood development or child development. The definition of child development is change in the child that occurs over time. Changes follow an orderly pattern that moves towards greater complexity and enhances survival. Human beings develop to survive in the environments that they're in. We don't often think about this as survival. We think about it as just life. But what is life? Life is about maintaining within your environment and moving forward and hopefully reproducing for the next generation of species to continue. That's what life is about. Life is about consistent change, whether that change is good or bad. Life is about consistent change, and childhood development is about changes within that human body between the conception to 18 years old. That's what childhood development is about as we understand it within this framework that we're in. So we have those periods of development, right? We have the prenatal period from conception to birth, vital period, right? Unfortunately, African-American women have some of the worst conditions when it comes to prenatal care, prenatal outcomes of pregnancy, of children. If you look at some of the negative statistics, Black women and Native American women are usually high on the list when you look at the United States. And a lot of that's due to the environments that both groups find themselves in. Infancy and toddlerhood, usually look at from the birth to 2 years old. Then we have early childhood, which is usually 2 years old to 6 years old, which is a critical period. We don't pay enough attention to this period. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this as we move forward. But that, when we talk about closing gaps and advancing communities, I think that 2 to 6 is such a critical opportunity that does not get a lot of funding from the government, doesn't get a lot of attention from people, where we can really start shifting generations, genders too, but generations in that time period. And we don't do it. We don't think about it as defiantly as we should. Middle childhood, 6 to 12 years old, and adolescence, which is typically looked at from 12 to 19. Me personally, I extend adolescence from 12 to 25. And the reason why I do that is because of brain development. What we know about the brain is that it's not done developing until about 25, 26 years old, depending on the gender. Women's brains take a little bit longer to develop. Male brains stop developing around 24, 25 years old. Domains of development, right? So we have these domains, right? We have development described as 3 domains, but growth in one domain influences the other domains, which is important. So if you have trauma that happens in one area, it absolutely has an impact on another area. So we have the physical domain. So we're looking at body size, appearance, body proportions, motor development, etc. We have the cognitive domain, the thought process, the intellectual abilities, including things like being able to pay attention, focus on memory, problem solving, imagination, creativity, all these cognitive processes that happen in our brain. Then we have our social emotional domain, which is our self-knowledge, self-esteem, metacognition, sexual identity, ethnic identity, that pride in who you are, where you come from, your tribe, etc. We have moral reasoning, understanding expressions of emotion, self-regulation, just temperament, understanding others, interpersonal skills, and friendships. So all these domains have an intersection, a interplay with one another as children develop, as people develop. All these things play a role within one another. So we have to keep these things in mind as we talk about how trauma impacts brain development and just human development in general. So trauma, right? Stress. I'm someone, as you've seen in the previous day, where I correlate toxic stress and trauma as being very closely related and almost one and the same. Everybody goes through stress. And the way that we talk about stress is in 3 different components. We have positive stress, tolerable stress, and toxic stress. Positive stress, tolerable stress, and toxic stress. Those are the 3 types of stress that we're going to talk about today. So positive stress, right? Positive stress is like running late to a meeting. You wake up and you realize your phone did not charge and your battery's on 10%. You lose your keys. You can't find your keys to your car. You lose your wallet, right? You crack your windshield. Like, these are things that cause positive stress. Doesn't feel good. You have a spike in your cortisol levels, your stress hormones. But over time, those things come crashing on down, right? And that's normal. Everybody has it. It's very normal. Then we have what we call tolerable stress. This is like when grandma dies. Doesn't feel good. Hormone levels, stress levels, cortisol levels spike up. But eventually they come on down. But they can spike back up depending on what happens. Grandma's birthday, anniversaries, holidays come up. You smell some cookies that smell like the cookies that grandma used to make. That might send your stress levels up because you're grieving and missing your grandmother. But over time, it's supposed to come on down and stay on down as time goes by. That's tolerable stress. Then we have toxic stress. And toxic stress is that prolonged, strong, and frequent stress and anxiety that people struggle with. Things like being raped or sexually assaulted, being in an intense domestic violence environment or situation, being in a crime-ridden neighborhood with a heavy police presence where you hear sirens at all times of the day and night, to live in a war zone, right? All these things are toxic stress. Being chronically homeless. All these things are toxic stress because there's always a sense of threat, always a sense of alert, always a sense of panic. Something is not right in my environment. And one thing that I've learned about Black folks, African-American folks, American descendants of slaves, is a lot of times we've been in such toxic stress environments and had so much toxic stress, that stuff starts to feel normal to us. It's like, damn, this is just what it is. It's normal. And that toxic stress starts to look like positive stress and tolerable stress. It's kind of a crazy thing. In a clinical setting, I will see people and they will tell me things like, I was touched a lot as a child, and, I was forced to have sex with this person and that person. And it's not even a big deal because, I know some of my friends are doing it too. It's like, whoa, that's crazy. You were sexually abused. Or I hear things like, yeah, man, shoot, the first time I got oral sex, I was 8 years old. And it just kept happening. It was one of my aunties, and next thing you know, her friend wanted some. So I gave her some too, and I was 12. It's like, whoa, okay. But you know how it is, man. I'm just getting mine. I'm just doing my thing. That is toxic stress. It's also sexual abuse. But when you're in particular environments, if no one's telling you that those things are incorrect, or you feel like those things happen so often that they're normal, or you see that other people are doing those things become, they show up. I shouldn't say they become, their stress responses become, they look like positive, intolerable stress if they show up like stress at all. Unfortunately, we've been in the environment so much and almost conditioned in so many different situations that toxic stress doesn't even look like toxic stress anymore. It shows up as positive stress, which is very scary as a clinician and as a person who's concerned about the community. Very scary that we see this. We need to think about that. These things that we know are harmful. We know they have impacts on our neurodevelopment. We know that these things impact how we identify sexually. We know these things impact the way that we identify from a gender standpoint. We know that these things identify with, or have, not identify, but affect our self-esteem and our confidence. But when it's happened so often that it becomes normal, it starts to have a very interesting impact on us cognitively, where we can't even process it as something harmful and we process it as something normal. Very difficult to think about, very difficult to deal with. So again, what is toxic stress? Toxic stress is severe, prolonged, or repetitive adversity with the lack of the necessary nurturance and or support of a caregiver to prevent an abnormal stress response. Again, things continue to happen over and over and over. You don't have the appropriate intervention, usually that support from an adult or a caring parent, and that toxic stress just keeps going on and on and on. Without any intervention, that toxic stress continues to linger. This abnormal stress response consists of a derangement of the neuroendocrine immune response, resulting in a prolonged cortisol activation and a persistent inflammatory state. Try to say that 3 times fast. With the failure of the body to normalize the challenges after the stress is removed. So you've dealt with this so much that your body has become conditioned with those high levels of stress, that high level of cortisol, that it becomes normalized. So when you are in situations or environments where that stress is not necessary, you can't even adjust because your body's not used to it. Hence why we have a lot of Black children who leave their home and go to school and can't adjust. And then their behaviors start to show up like problematic behaviors, and they get labeled with things like ADHD. Because they've been in those toxic stress environments so long, adjusting to a school environment, which it can and often is very different than home, is difficult for those young people. And I should say not just home, but home and the community. It's different for those young people. And unfortunately, our babies get diagnosed and labeled with things because they haven't had the skills. They haven't been introduced to the skill set to cope with their stress, their trauma, their emotional issues, and those things show up like behavioral issues depending on the environments that they're in. This happens way too often. All right, I'm going to nerd out on you a little bit here. Please bear with me. We're going to go over a little bit of brain science. All right, so our synapse connections. So our brains have these synapse connections, and what happens in our brain is as our brains develop, these synapse connections start to happen all throughout our heads. And this is what develops our learning. This is what develops our understanding of the world around us. So if you look at this first slide that says at birth on the left, the far left, this is what a baby's brain looks like around the age of 10 months, years old. Not a lot of connection. This is when babies are putting things in their mouths. They're eating things, right? They're touching on warm things. They're running around doing goofy things like my baby, my second child. She jumped off the couch and broke her arm, scared me to death, right? Had to take her in to get her arm checked out. I'm terrified because I think child protection is going to come get this brother. Now, I live pretty much a middle-class lifestyle. I have 2 master's degrees. I am a professional Black person. You can say that. But I definitely had the same stress response when my baby broke her arm, that once I take her in this clinic that we go to for my children, I might get child protection called on me. So I'm terrified. My stress is activated. My cortisol levels are elevated at this time. So we go in there. My daughter, they run the x-ray on her. They say, yep, it's a clean break. We got to put a cast on it right away. They do so. We get out of there. Child protection doesn't show up to my house. I'm thinking at any point they can come, figure out what's going on. And when we get home, guess what? My daughter, with her fresh, nice cast, she has a bright red cast. She goes right back to that couch. Freaked me and her mom out. We're terrified. Girl, get off that couch. We don't want you to break your arm again. And what we were saying at that time is, one, we don't want our child to get hurt, but for our daughter, that couch represents her playground. That's her comfort zone. That's what she does. She likes to goof around on the couch, bounce around, hop off. But we're terrified she's going to jump off and break her arm. So what was she doing? She was learning about her environment. That cast was not going to slow her down. It didn't scare her from the couch, because that couch is her comfort zone, but she's still learning about her environment. So that's what happens during that stage of development between birth and about 3 to 4 years old. What happens at around 3 to 4 years old is the middle slide. So we get that between, I say, 4 and about 8 years old. This is when a human being's brain is at its highest level of development. Very important. Very important. So this is the stage that drives me nuts, because I also have a 6-year-old daughter at this point in time. And this is what I call brains on fire. As you can see, there's a lot of synapse connection. It's very well dense. There's a lot of connectivity going on. And this is when you have a young person who's asking you why to everything. Why this, daddy? Why that? Mama, why this? Why? To the point where you can't answer the question no more, and you just say things like, go ask Siri and leave me alone, right? Because that's me. That's what I said to my daughter. Go ask Siri and leave me alone, girl. Get out of my face. Stop asking me about stuff I don't know. That's what I was thinking. Until my daughter actually started to ask Siri things, and then it started to scare me. Like, whoa, this young lady knows how to work screens and iPads and iPhones better than me. She can do these things because that's her environment. My 6-year-old has grown up in a world where there's screens all over. That's her environment. She learned how to adapt those things. She knows how to download things. She knows how to put in passwords. Can you imagine passwords? When I was a child, a password was something that you told somebody else, or you guessed to somebody else to get access to something. Nowadays, you got to have multiple passwords just to live. And that's my daughter's reality. So for her, she doesn't know anything different. She understands that she can talk to a device and the device can talk back to her. When I was a child, that was some Star Trek stuff. So what is she learning, right? Her brain is at this highest level of development. She can pick up concepts way quicker than adult can at this point in time in life. This is why they say you should introduce a second language and literacy and math and things like that to your child during this time, because they're going to pick that stuff up a lot sooner and have a better opportunity to remember and keep those things with them as they move forward. Very pivotal time in a young person's life, 4 to 8 years old. When we talk about developing the Black community, when we talk about moving forward people who struggle, if we really wanted to do it, we would look at that age range, that pre-K, early elementary age range. We could really push a lot of people forward if we put funding, organization, and policy behind developing our future. Because right there is going to be the opportunity to create a lot of young geniuses, to create a lot of creativity, to not just create a lot of creativity, to push a lot of creativity and innovation that will change not only our community, but this world, if we look at it that way. So by the time a kid gets about 10, 11, 12 years old, our brains do something just like our bodies. It starts to go through puberty. So our brains start to prune off and prioritize things that it feels that it needs for survival, just like our bodies do. So the way I like to talk about this is one of my former clients. She's now entering her, at this point in time, she's entering her first year of college. I'm very proud of this young lady. This is a young lady a lot of people did not think that will be able to make it to such a place like college on scholarships and actually having a future. So this is a young lady that I received as a client of mine during her first few months of ninth grade year. She was 14 years old. when I received her for a client. And the school brought her to me because, I'm the magical Negro, the black male therapist, the unicorn that can fix all the black children. So they bring her to me and they said, we don't know what's going on with this young lady, but we think she's depressed. Do you think you reach out to her parents and see if, therapy is something that can happen for her? And at this time, I was working school-based mental health therapy. So I reached out to the parents, convinced them, hey, I'm gonna, the school's concerned about your daughter. I want to connect with you all and, provide some therapy. They agree. I do the diagnostic assessment, and she doesn't really qualify for any mental health disorders. So she receives something called an adjustment disorder. Now, an adjustment disorder is when a person, not just a young person, a person, period, doesn't have enough criteria to fit an actual mental health disorder, but does show some symptomology. So this is typically what a therapist would give somebody like that. So she had an adjustment disorder with depressive symptoms based on my diagnostic assessment. So after the diagnostic assessment was done, we had our first session and I asked her a typical therapy question. Tell me a little bit about your day-to-day. And this is what this young lady told me. So I already knew that her family dynamic. She had 2 working parents. She had 2 younger siblings. She had a 9-year-old brother and a 7-year-old sister. And the 5 of them lived in a 2-bedroom apartment. That's already toxic stress in itself. Okay? So notice the age difference, 14 and 9. It's a 5 years age difference. Pretty significant, right? So this young lady had to share a room with 2 younger siblings. And in that household, she really didn't share a room because her brother slept in the living room and her younger sister slept in the bed with mommy and daddy. So she kind of had her own room, but she kind of didn't. So this is what she told me about her typical day. She wake up at about 6:15 in the morning, check her phone, see what's going on Snapchat, see what she missed. Then she'll go get her outfit on, get her hair done, look all good, right? Then she'll help her little brother and sister get ready for school. And then she will, say a little something to her parents and then march through their apartment complex with her brother and sister and get them to their bus stop. Then she would get on her bus. And in Minneapolis, for high school students, we don't have a school bus system, so they have to catch what we call Metro Transit, which is our metropolitan bus system. We have a light rail system. So this young lady would catch a bus downtown Minneapolis, one bus, to catch a second bus to Southwest Minneapolis, where she attended school. That's about 30 to 40 minutes of bus rides in itself. And that's if your bus comes on time. And in Minnesota, that is not a guarantee when the weather starts to get cold. But for folks who understand about Metro Transit and for folks who ride transit systems throughout the United States, crazy stuff happens on the bus all the time. And this young lady had to do this not once, but twice a day for a week. So we got 10 different bus rides that she's doing. Right? 10 different, or not actually, she has 20 different bus rides, so she's riding 2 different buses. Okay. So that's toxic stress in itself, because this was a well-developed 14-year-old girl. And she would hear things like, hey, baby, how you doing? You look good. You want to spend some time with me. You want some weed. Always this, this engagement of come spend some time with me. Don't worry about school. You need to be hanging out with somebody like myself. And for folks who aren't aware, Minnesota's top 5 in sex trafficking, and we bounce all the time on that top 5 list. And this is unfortunately how a lot of young women, especially young women of color, find themselves in these situations, is being recruited during what we call high transition time periods, like early in the morning before school and right after school. This is how you get a lot of young women and young males, believe it or not, into things like sex trafficking. So she had to fend all that off too, which is a lot of stress when you are a young 14-year-old girl just trying to go to school and you got people trying to talk to you and people trying to get you to have sex with them and smoke weed with them. So on her second bus, she'll see her friends, they'll chit-chat about what's going on. She'll get off the bus, get to school, grab some little dry cereal from school, and then head to her first hour, which was unfortunately math class. Why would you do that to kids? I don't know. And when she would get to math class, what do you think the first thing would happen when she got to class? I'm going to pause here. What do you think would happen? She would fall asleep, head on the desk, out like a light. So the school interpreted this as, this young lady's unmotivated. This young lady doesn't care about her education. She just comes here and sleep. There must be problems going on at home. What's going on? So they come find the magical Negro, myself, to help her out. I thought about this because, I know a little bit about brain science, know a little bit about how people adjust to their environments. And I said, wow, this young lady has a lot of stuff she has to deal with just to get to school. So I had a decent relationship with the counselors, and I was able to work out a way for her to shift her schedule. So what I did was I offered a solution. I said, hey, let me have therapy with this young lady the first thing in the morning. And on the day she doesn't come see me for therapy, she can go to she can have a scheduled study hall, which was really just an opportunity for her to go to this quiet kind of therapeutic room that they set up in the school so she can either rest or just get herself ready for school. They agreed to that, and went by, a couple months went by, grades went up, productivity went up, her engagement in school went up because she had time to adjust to the school day. Now, was that magic therapy that I did, or was that me understanding the cultural context, being culturally responsive, and also understanding brain science and understanding what this young lady was going through? Because that first hour class, that math class, was probably the most calm environment that this young lady has been in the last 16, 18 hours of her day. So, of course, her brain's going to say, baby girl, you need to lay down. Baby girl, you need to rest. And then she just falls asleep because she's been overly stimulated all day, living in an apartment building where people are up and down the stairs, living in an environment like North Minneapolis where you got a high police presence, you got sirens and gunshots and talking and music and all this stimuli going on 24 hours a day. So you get in that math class and your brain's like, oh my God, finally a place for me to relax. I don't have to be on alert here. There's no noise. And your brain says, rest, because you might not get an opportunity to rest again. And that's what happened. That's what happened for this young lady. And that's what happens for, unfortunately, a lot of folks every day, is that we get in environments that our brains perceive to be safe. And we start to slow down, we start to shut down because there's no perceived threat. So what this tells us is this: not only do we live in these environments, but these environments also live within us. Our brains are wired for survival. Our brains would do things to help us survive in the environments that we're in. And if we don't take care of ourselves, if we don't build coping skills, if we don't understand this basic, to me, this is basic, but for a lot of people, it's not, brain science, we will unfortunately not understand why we are adjusting to the environment we're in and why we are reacting to the things that we react to in the way that we do. So this is very, very important brain science to understand: the synapse density pruning. Our brains will prioritize and prune things that it believes. It will prioritize things that it believes it needs for survival and prune off things that it doesn't. We see this all the time. So next time you hear, people talking about how Black kids don't care about their education, sometimes they're just responding to the environments that they're in. One thing that's true: you use it or you lose it. So what is not pruned, what is not pruned is used. What is pruned isn't used. So what is used develops stronger connections. So a baby girl at 14 years old has to develop skills to maintain her survival. Guess what's going to be strong? Survival skills. But if she has to prune off study skills because she can't focus because she's trying to worry about her safety, then she's going to prune off those study skills. It ain't going to be that important to her. We see this too much with our young people. They don't care about school because school it doesn't fit their environment, it doesn't fit their reality to survive. So it doesn't mean anything to them. They don't care about it. They're like, why am I even here when I'm hungry? Why am I even here when I need to make money? Because I understand that money helps my family. Unfortunately, we have too many young people who are in this situation and they don't see why things like school are important. I'm starting to see young people who don't even want to play sports because they don't see why it's important. They don't even want to engage socially with their peers because they don't see an outcome that's based on them surviving. Not just because it's fun, you can hang out with your friends, you can learn team building skills or leadership skills. They're like, man, I can't eat off of playing basketball. I can't eat off being a cheerleader. I can't eat playing soccer. or volleyball or being a swimmer or playing softball. I can't, or baseball. I can't eat off of that. We got young people thinking like adults and they 12 years old talking about what they can't eat off of. We got a lot of work to do. So develops in spurts. When the brain is best equipped with to learn certain skills, this is what happens. We have to help our young people develop certain skills because when they're best equipped, they're better able to survive. They're better able to survive. And this is very, very, very important. One of my goals is to not only teach survival skills, cognitive behavioral skills, neuro-linguistic programming skills. People need to have skills to cope with these stressful environments that we're in, these stressful times. Society is very anti-Black, has a negative outcome for a lot of us, and we have to be able to cope and manage and move forward and understand that our self-mastery and our development is vital. We're going to get in a little bit of how this all works. So if you look here in the red circle, this is your limbic system. In your limbic system, there's several different parts of your brain that are connected to memories throughout the whole brain, by the way, but these areas are critical for memory. And one of those areas is your amygdala. Your amygdala is like your ADT system for your emotions. It's your security system. So if something ain't right, it will trigger that ADT part of your brain, that amygdala. There's something called the amygdala hijack. So when people are in very stressful situations, our amygdala get activated. When our amygdalas are activated, unfortunately, it blocks signals to that yellow part that has the red X in it. That's what we call the prefrontal cortex, or the executive functioning part, your frontal lobe. That's where we have our reasoning, our thinking area of our brain. It does not get those signals when the amygdala is activated, because your amygdala is like, you got to be safe. You got to be safe. Pay attention. Be on alert. So you can't use a lot of reasoning because you're just trying to survive in that very moment. Unfortunately, we have a lot of folks who have experienced so much trauma and been in so many toxic stressful environments that their amygdalas are hijacked. They're overly stimulated and they can't function very well. They can't use that reasonable part of the brain, that executive functioning part of the brain, because their amygdala is saying, you need to watch your back. You need to pay attention. You need to be very, very careful because something bad is going to happen. So what happens? So a young person experiences traumatic event. They're usually in a fight or freeze kind of position. The limbic system's activated. Your stress hormone is released. Hormones are released as a response of fear and anxiety. So that's that cortisol I was talking about is released. You have frequent exposure to stressful, scary situations can lead to toxic levels of stress in the child. And all these things play a huge role in the development. So again, cortisol, I mentioned a few times today. Cortisol is your stress hormone. Unfortunately, we have a lot of folks in our community that have extremely high levels of cortisol due to just daily stress that they experience. And cortisol has all different types of impacts on your body. High levels of cortisol can slow brain development, and a child may experience more cognitive, motor, and social delays. Now, that's in a child. In an adult, if you have those high cortisol levels, it's going to start affecting your physical health. It's going to start affecting your way you think, the way you cope with your emotions, etc. All right. So students or young people with serious emotional disturbance are at risk of educational failure. I put this in here because it's important, because a lot of times we think that our kids are just bad. Like, oh, you're just a bad kid. And it's like, people don't even consider that this kid's brain might be going through a lot of things. It might have some dysregulation going on. So a lot of times we have a lot of emotional disturbance. We have failure of more classes, missing more days of school, earning lower grades, repeating more grade levels, high levels of dropout, having more difficulty finding a job. So this is being productive after school, and are more likely to be involved with the criminal justice system. This is from the U.S. Department of Education in 1998 when they put this out. So in the late 90s, we start to look a lot at social emotional intelligence and how that actually can assist and help young people. But what we found out is if young people are in a lot of stress, it starts to impact their ability to focus and be productive, not just in school, but also in employment. Very important information. So when we have a lot of adults and we start talking about how adults don't handle their business and how they're lazy, a lot of them have had neurological disruptions and emotional disruptions that have affected their lifestyle. So some characteristics of children with serious emotional disturbances are this: frequent and severe, frequently served in multiple systems. So you see a lot of people who are in one social service program, a government program here, a school program there. They got all these different systems kind of at play because they have emotional disturbances. High levels of co-occurring disorders. That might be a new term for a lot of people. Well, what that means is there's a mental illness presence and there's a chemical dependency issue present. A lot of times with people that I work with, it's a lot of heavy weed smoking that's coupled with high levels of anxiety or depression, or even more serious pristine mental illnesses like a personality disorder, etc. So the median age of onset for mental health issues was around 11 years old, and for substance abuse issues was 5 to 10 years old. Let's just say was, not WS. Sorry about that edit there. Think about that. You got young people between the ages of 5 and 10 years old who are engaging in chemical use to cope with the stress that they're going through. Very, very important. And how do they get access to that stuff? Stuff's laying around, they just pick it up and they take it and use it, right? High risk for mental health disorder increases in children who have physical problems and chronic illness, intellectual disabilities, low birth weights, and prenatal exposure to alcohol and drugs. Remember earlier I talked about that conception period being very important. Family history of mental health or addictive disorders, multi-generational poverty, caregiver separation. So this is when your parents aren't together, or you end up being with grandma or auntie or foster care system because your caregivers have moved on for whatever reason. Neglect or abuse of stressful, unsatisfactory situations or relationships, and exposure to traumatic events. So we see a lot of mental health disorders having a higher probability when these things end up happening. Here's an actual how do we reduce the risk, right? So it's kind of a quadrant that comes on here. It's a triangular kind of understanding framework. So a caring adult is very important. A lot of research points to caring adults. That may be you. It may be in a work context or a family context or even you as a parent, but being that caring adult is very important because people need social support. So high quality childcare. So being able to have childcare that is supporting the development of the young person is vital. And at least one secure attachment, right? So that attachment is at least one person that this young person feels like they can connect with, that they trust, that is not going to harm, abuse, or hurt them, is very vital to reduce mental health disorders, chemical dependencies, and it can help reduce the response to the traumatic event. Because if I know I can count on somebody and I'm not alone, it's going to take me a lot further than if I do feel like I'm all by myself. This next concept we're going to talk about is something we call survival stress management, which is a process of adapting to stressful situations by acting and or reacting without thinking of consequences of our choices, right? A lot of folks are stuck in this I need it now super entitlement mode. And a lot of times we get into this position where we are not thinking about our actions. There's one thing that I learned about trauma. Trauma makes things about the moment. So if I don't feel good right now and I want to feel good, I'm going to do whatever I need to at this particular point to feel good. Unfortunately, we have a lot of people who do things to feel good in the moment. And they end up having things like babies and STIs and criminal records because they just did what they needed to do right here, right now, and did not think about the consequences of their choices, right? So this happens a lot. A loss of narrative. So unfortunately, we have a lot of folks who have been here. We have a lot of folks who have survived. But when you're always responding to things without a plan, it's hard for you to understand how you got to where you're at. A lot of times I ask people, I hear these very graphic things. I might be seeing someone who's, 26 years old as a client, And I say, wow, you've been through all that. How'd you get here? And they'll say things like, I don't know. I don't know, Brandon. I just been doing what I got to do to make it. And that's not good, because that starts to chip away at your self-esteem. It starts to chip away at your confidence, at your ability to understand self-mastery. Because if you don't understand how you got to where you're at and you've just been existing, that's very strange, but it's very difficult as well. And it's hard for you to take credit for the things that you've done and understand how to learn from the mistakes and losses in your life when you don't understand how you got to where you're at today. And unfortunately, we have too many people who have lost their narrative of resiliency and have just been in existence to the point where they're at today. All right, I believe this is the last slide. So, deficiencies that occur in the early years may be overcome with a later enrichment through the process. Will likely be more difficult. Among the most important windows are those involving emotional and social development. Your brain has plasticity and can recover over time. So there is hope. I did share a lot of very difficult things around trauma and brain development, but there is something that we call neuroplasticity, where you can redevelop your brain, believe it or not. There's this process called neuroplasticity, can be defined as the ability of the nervous system to respond to the internal and external stimuli by reorganizing its structure, function, and connection. This takes a lot of work. It's not easy. It can be done in therapy. It can be done on your own, but it has to have a focus, and you have to work and persevere and push through a lot of things. You have to be honest with yourself. You have to address your trauma. This whole concept of rewiring your brain sounds like some kind of science experiment, but it is possible to develop those skills. There are a couple therapeutic things that you can do to do that. One is cognitive behavioral therapy, which is something I use very often. One is DBT, right? Diabolical behavioral therapy. I almost said that wrong. One is NLP, which is neuralistic programming. One is EMDR, which is eye movement. EMDR. Eye movement desensitization rehabilitation. I think that's what EMDR is. I shouldn't be getting that wrong. But it's another form of therapy. I've been trained in it, but I don't use it very often because Black folks don't like to be touched and all that. So I don't do that one. But there are ways for us to rewire our brains. It takes a lot of work. It doesn't happen in a microwave. Doesn't happen quick. But it is something for you to think about. So I would highly suggest that you do some Googling on neuroplasticity and look at some of the strategies to rewire, quote unquote, your brain, right? So that's going to do it for today. I hope you enjoyed this part of the 5-day video course. As I stated at the beginning of the video, if you have any questions for me, if you need anything from me, definitely check me out at jegna.org. Website is right there below. I appreciate you coming over. And as I always like to say, be safe, be constructive, be elite, be a Jegna. And I will see you in the next day. Peace.